Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Gentrio podcast. Today's episode is a little different, but definitely worth the listen. We've talked a lot on this podcast about, keeping things in order, trying to avoid worst case scenarios, but sometimes we still find ourselves in them, no matter how much we think we might be able to avoid them. And my guest today, Maria, has courageously allowed us to hear her story so that we can all better understand what the real world can sometimes look like. For some background information, Maria has 2 advanced degrees and an Ivy League level education. She's a very successful business person and an entrepreneur, and still found herself in, one of these situations where she was being conned by someone she thought she was close to and could trust. So I just want to take a moment first to say welcome to the show, Maria, and thank you very much for your willingness to share your story.
You're welcome. Thank you for the time, Jacob.
So why don't we just jump right in? I will give the floor to you, and let's dive right into your story and what went on.
Well, I'm in my early 60s, and 5 years ago, my father gave me probably the nicest gift he's ever given me, and that was money towards the down payment of my first house. And during the purchase of the home, he had a medical situation arise. He fell, and he was then hospitalized, and his health started to decline. And while my home purchase was completed, and I'm ever so grateful to the gift that he gave me of the down payment, it started what then became a really just unbelievable series of events as far as how his estate was handled. So I still don't know to this day if the gift was intended to be part of my inheritance or not. I never asked him that question, and he didn't volunteer it. I have a gift letter that he provided to the mortgage company when he had given the money to the escrow company, but I truly don't know if he ever intended that to be part of my inheritance. So I'll leave it at that. But what ended up happening is he had, a number of years ago, I believe, had a conversation with one of my brothers. There are 3 siblings. 2 are step-siblings that my father adopted by marriage when he remarried a second time, and 1 sibling is part of my immediate, or was part of my immediate family, and happened to have also been adopted, but that is neither here nor there. At any rate, the sibling that I sort of grew up with is in law enforcement and had been asked to be the executor of my father's estate. In hindsight, I don't know if he was asked or if he was coerced or encouraged to put that individual into that role, but I didn't really question it. I was never that close to my dad, and I kind of figured my dad was going to take care of things the way that he saw fit. And I should add that my dad was an accountant by training. He was a very educated and very savvy individual, and he was also European, kind of a World War II baby, and grew up during that time. So I think he was very frugal, and he was concerned about safety and some of the just social issues that arose at the time. But what ended up happening before my dad even passed away, the sibling that was designated to become the executor, and I didn't even think my dad was going to pass away that quickly, but started saying really unkind things, demanded to see the paperwork for my house, and I said, that's not really any of your business, and started threatening me and saying, you're lucky I'm even letting you keep the house. And I said, what are you talking about? And he didn't elaborate. And one of the other 2 step siblings has a nursing background and had been designated as the decision maker in terms of my father's health affairs. So he essentially had the health proxy. And I kind of stepped back because I thought, he had asked these 2 individuals to take on those roles. One thing I should make clear is my dad had been very explicit. He sent these things in letters to us. So we all got snail mail, hard copy letters of things that he wanted to do. And one of those explicitly stated that he did not want the same person to be the executor and have power of attorney. And that was abundantly clear. And when my brother said what he did about, "You're lucky I'm letting you keep the house," I actually mentioned it to my dad because he was in the hospital, and he said, "That's just ridiculous." And my father had what he thought prepared for his final days. He had a briefcase that he called his end-of-life briefcase. He asked me to bring him the briefcase from his house and bring it to him in the hospital. And I wasn't entirely comfortable doing that. I wasn't sure if that was considered meddling or interfering, or somehow I was very uncomfortable already with some of the comments that the sibling had made about, "You're lucky I'm letting you keep the house." So I didn't want to create any sense that I was somehow trying to have my father say or do things that he didn't originally intend. And so I told my dad, "I don't know that that's a good idea. Maybe we should all have a conversation." But he really wanted to see his briefcase. And so I went to his home and I brought the briefcase to him in the hospital, and it was locked. I didn't know how to open it, and my dad had the combination. And when he opened the briefcase, he said, "I should have hired a lawyer." And then he closed the briefcase. And again, I was in a really awkward position. I didn't know what to think or do. I said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "I want you to take this down." He proceeded to dictate a statement to me saying that he wanted me now to be the executor and have his health care, decision-making rights in the event that he's not able to make them himself. And he also gave me power of attorney. And I said, "I'm really not comfortable with this because this is not a transparent process with the other siblings. I don't know that I can assume all of these responsibilities. I work." I was kind of not expecting to get that. But I honored his wishes. I typed it up. He had a notary come in, and it was signed, and he asked me to make 4 copies, which I did. They were all notarized, and I put them in his dresser in his bedroom at the house, and I kind of let it go because I didn't really know what else to do with that. And he said he didn't know what he wanted to do. He didn't know if he wanted to get a lawyer right then and there, and he said he was going to think about it. So basically what happened is my father's health declined. He had a urinary tract infection, and he had fallen. What happened is he had fallen in his home, and we didn't know he fell. He had one of these little devices that you wore around your neck that was like a beeper where you could, if you pressed the button, it was supposed to alert either the police or a hospital or something, and it didn't work. And he was apparently on the floor in his home for 2 days before it was discovered that he had fallen. And as soon as I found out, I called the sibling who was designated as the executor, and he immediately came out, and we all flew out to see my dad. And this, again, transpired literally at the tail end of my completing my home purchase, which is what made it very dramatic and kind of like a bad movie. But essentially what happened is he got bounced in and out of the hospital to assisted living, and it was unclear whether or not he was going to go back to his house. I would have liked to see him go back to his house. I will say that the sibling designated as the executor already started taking the house apart prematurely, was going through stuff, was all over my father's computers, and apparently going into bank accounts. And I was sort of in shock because I didn't expect my dad's health to decline, and I wasn't really sure what my role was, even though I had this notarized document, which I knew everyone would question if I brought it up, so I didn't. And the sibling who was the executor or designated executor at that time basically spent much more time on my father's computers than he did next to my dad. So that was a little odd and disconcerting. We traveled. None of us lived in the same state. My father lived in Florida at the time, and one sibling was in Europe. One sibling had flown in from Asia, and the brother I grew up with lives in Colorado, and I'm in Los Angeles. And so we all came from different locations, and we flew in and out at different times to spend time with our dad. I happened to be in New York in January, which is when his health seemed to really be declining, and I got a phone call that he had decided to be moved into hospice care, which I found, again, really shocking because it happened so rapidly. And I flew in on a late night flight from New York. I think I got in around 11:30 or so. Arrangements had been made for someone to pick me up, so I didn't even have the address where I was going. I was taken to the hospice, and my dad was absolutely lucid. He was definitely excited to see me. I had every intention of sitting there with him and spending time with him, and I was made to leave. I was told, no, you and your mom have to go to this motel, and we'll pick you up in the morning. And I said, I don't want to go to a motel. I'd like to stay and sit with our dad. No, you have to go. And I said, why are we staying in a motel and not in his house? It's just easier that way. And I was basically forced to leave. And I was really unhappy about that. So my mom and I were put into a pretty dumpy motel, whatever that is. And I did not know where the hospice was, and I was not picked up. I kept calling the next day saying, can you come and get us? I wanted to be there first thing in the morning. The morning went by, early afternoon. I don't remember exactly what time it was when we were finally picked up, but at that point, my dad was no longer lucid, and I couldn't speak with him. I had talked to my mom about what he was like before I arrived the day before, and she said she had encouraged him to hang in there and fight because he could get better and go home, and he had said to her, I give up. And what is very heartbreaking to me in hindsight, looking back, my father knew at the time, before he died, that his final affairs were being mishandled. And I didn't realize the extent to which he knew that, but that is undoubtedly what was happening. And I cannot imagine what it would be like to have thoughtfully put all of your paperwork in order and make plans for your loved ones, and then see the person that you had agreed to put in charge of all of this intentionally and willfully not follow those wishes and not be able to do anything about it. That was extremely upsetting to me, and I've only kind of put this together in hindsight over the time that's passed, and I will say I was not prepared to be as shocked or as emotional or as distraught as I was when my father's health was declining. I was not particularly close to him. He was a difficult person in a lot of ways, but he was still my dad. I was the biological kid. I was the only girl. None of that really matters, but I will say I was not prepared for, the emotional jolt that gave me. And when you're in shock like that, you're not always thinking clearly. And I think I was running on adrenaline and I was running on fear, and I just didn't know really what was happening. But it doesn't excuse the behavior of the siblings. And so literally 2 days after my dad passed away, my brother wanted me to go with him to a lawyer that he had hired, and it was presented to me as, this is our family lawyer who's going to help us. And I should go back briefly to a couple of parts of the story that I didn't mention. So I did show two of the siblings the letters, and that was done, I think it was literally the day after my father passed away. So one sibling had not flown in yet from Europe, and it was the three siblings and my mom and I. And the brother who was the executor was making all kinds of noises saying, I don't know how we're going to pay for any of this. He had been saying that before my dad passed away. He's broke. he doesn't have any money. We can't pay for the assisted living. This is all going to be a problem, and it's all presumably my fault because my father helped with the down payment of my house. So I'm already feeling really guilty and conflicted about potentially having created this. And a part of me was thinking, that can't be right. Why would my father have offered to do that if that was going to completely mess up his finances? That was completely out of context. It was absolutely not who my dad was, and it didn't make sense to me. But that's how it was being presented. And the person who was, again, the designated executor, super, super aggressive, and said to me he had a recording of my father, and he knew exactly what my father wanted, and it was all on this recording. And I repeatedly asked that he play it for me, and he didn't. And he also had said if I didn't like how he was handling things, I should sue him. And I said, what in the world are you talking about? Why would I sue you? None of this made any sense. So there was this really aggressive, unexpectedly aggressive behavior. I was also made to feel like I was insignificant and not really a part of this. Clearly, the letters that my dad had me provide to the group were completely dismissed and poo-pooed, and I expected as much. So there's this unbelievably aggressive, not very kind behavior that's also going on that came from left field. And again, I was not particularly close to any of these siblings. We didn't really grow up together. The two stepbrothers I didn't know at all. And the adopted brother that I grew up with until my parents got divorced, I hadn't seen him in years, and I didn't really know him as a person, but I kind of figured he's in law enforcement. He's at least going to handle this appropriately and the way that he would if it was a professional situation. And so I didn't initially question the integrity or that it would be done improperly. I just didn't expect, again, the aggressiveness and the unkind, really almost cruel behavior, even towards my mom. My mother had said she thought my father might have wanted to be buried and not cremated. That was not up for discussion. He kind of shut my mom down right away. My mom is very Catholic, and the aggression was, I was unprepared for that. I did not see that coming. I actually thought it would have been an opportunity for the four siblings to get together and have a moment to share some memories of growing up with this person and just sharing some of the positive things about him and his life. None of that happened. I had even wanted to take pictures, photographs. My dad was really big into taking pictures and often took pictures even when nobody wanted to have pictures taken, and that never happened. He was never shown any pictures. Nothing was brought into the hospital or to the hospice for him to enjoy, and I, again, questioned all of that. But so this very aggressive behavior that was present, and I didn't expect that either. So I'm in shock. I'm upset. I'm dealing with this loss that was unexpected, and also this very aggressive, unkind behavior on top of it. And it was 2 days after my father passed away. I was made to go to this lawyer's office with the brother who was the designated executor and one of the two stepbrothers. The other had not yet arrived. And I thought it was odd that the fourth one didn't even have the courtesy of coming for this meeting, but I felt like I couldn't say no. So I was brought into this lawyer's office, and the way that it was presented was, this is our family lawyer, and you can ask this person any questions at any time. They are here for all of us. They're going to help us with this enormous mess because there was no will, and his finances are in a shambles, and basically, I still remember like it was yesterday what this lawyer said in the office. It was a short meeting, but the lawyer said, so there was no will, and obviously Maria already got her part when the house was purchased, and if there's anything at all left, you would, of course, want to divide it equally amongst yourselves so that it would be divided among the three who hadn't received anything yet. And I just sat there. I didn't know what to say. I said, I just don't know. I don't know what his intentions were. I never had that conversation with him. I said, maybe this is a good opportunity for us to hear the recording that was made of our dad, because presumably there was a recording that still hasn't been played for me. It was in the lawyer's office that my brother, the law enforcement professional, who my dad designated apparently to be his executor, said, I deleted that. I don't have that recording. It wasn't necessary. And I just sat there.
Really?
I didn't even know what to say or what to think. And I, again, was told, this is our family lawyer is going to help with this big mess. And he said, the sibling executor said, I know exactly what he wants, and pretty straightforward. I was given a half sheet of paper to sign, and I said, I'm not sure I should be signing anything. I don't really know what this is. And I was told this is just standard procedure. It basically makes it easier for the lawyer to work on everything, and she doesn't have to ask each of us and get everybody's permission every single time she's doing anything. I said, I really don't think I should be signing anything. This is standard procedure. We don't have time for this. The clock is ticking, and, she's giving us a deal. I was basically bullied into signing it. And it said that it was a waiver of some kind. I said, I don't really know what I'm waiving. It's just standard procedure. You're going to get a copy of everything. If you have any questions at any time, you can call any time. And I was given a second item to sign. I think it was a pink sheet of paper. And I said, I don't know what this is. And we're all signing that. That basically means any of the money in Europe is going to be handled by the lawyer and the sibling that's in Europe. And it's just going to make it easier so that, again, other people don't have to be contacted for every single step. And the stepbrother that was there signed it with this very dramatic flourish. And again, I said, I'm not so sure I should be signing everything. They all looked at me like I was holding everything up and I was the crazy person. And I was kind of bullied into signing it. So I don't know what I signed. I think in hindsight, and I never got copies, by the way. I didn't get copies that afternoon. I certainly never got copies because that lawyer never took a single phone call, nor did that person ever respond to emails. And I sent many, and I tried to contact that person. And basically what happened is I got radio silence from everybody. The executor did not respond to me. I did get a phone call from him the next day because I flew back to Los Angeles, and the next day the person, my stepbrother, not my stepbrother, sorry, the next day my brother, who was the executor, called me, and I was not in the mood to talk to him after telling me that he had deleted, if it ever even existed, the recording he made of my dad in the lawyer's office. I wasn't going to talk to him, so I didn't answer the phone. And subsequently, I got an email saying, oh, we all tried to reach you. The lawyer tried to reach you. I tried to reach you. You didn't answer your phone. We had to have an emergency meeting. What that emergency meeting was about, I have no idea. Was not disclosed to me, but the lawyer did not try to contact me. I would have answered the phone had that person called. I did not answer the phone calls from my brother, and I have the phone records to prove that I didn't get any other phone calls. But basically, they had some additional meeting, and I missed a step of the story that I suppose you could add elsewhere. But when the fourth sibling finally did arrive before I left, he and my brother, the executor, had private meetings. And I kept saying, why aren't we having these conversations as a group? Why can't we all have a look at what was in his briefcase together and discuss what his wishes were? Why can't we see what was in the briefcase? None of that happened. None of that happened. And there was a complete lack of transparency. I feel like I got hoodwinked by this lawyer that was presented as our lawyer that was clearly, in hindsight, now that I know better, it was somebody that was hired to protect my brother, and that was it. And I think what I signed was a waiver that essentially said, I don't need to know anything. I'm not questioning anything. Just give me a check when it's all done. And if I had known that's what I was signing, I would have never, ever signed such a document. So, what else has been happening? This is over 5 years ago. My father passed away in January in 2019, and I have, I don't know how many emails. I hired a lawyer to help me draft emails that went unanswered. I sent emails to the lawyer that my brother had hired. I sent emails to the siblings saying, can I please see the financial records? Can I please have the baby pictures and some of the personal belongings that our dad had? And nobody ever responded. And I was really, really heartbroken and upset. I ended up hiring a lawyer. I hired a lawyer probably a day late and a dollar short, and was a lawyer that sounded great on the phone, but didn't do much. I gave him a retainer. I gave him a $5,000 retainer and had asked that he contest my brother's ability to be the executor. And I think by the time I hired this lawyer, a year had already passed, and there are all these statutes of limitation in Florida. And if at the time I didn't realize that half sheet of paper that I signed had basically waived everything. I waived all my rights. I didn't know that. And that lawyer did not file the paperwork questioning my brother's ability to be the executor. And I basically got nothing for my $5,000. And in fairness, he talked to me on the phone a couple of times. I sent him emails, but I don't know why the paperwork was never filed. So that was extremely disappointing, and I was hesitant to do it in the first place because I knew my father would have been upset at the idea that siblings were suing each other. He would never have wanted to see that happen. He would have never wanted his hard-earned money squandered in his idea or his mind. It would have been squandered on legal fees. He tried to prevent that from happening, and I think with the best of intentions, my dad chose not to go through a lawyer because he didn't think it was necessary, and he wanted to save the money, and by not doing so, created the scenario that just turned into an absolute nightmare. If my dad had known about a service like Gentrio, if things could have been secured electronically, if he had had the contents of his briefcase in the electronic vault, where everyone could have seen what it contained, and there was no shell game going on of, oh, I have a secret recording that was made, and no, that never existed, or that got erased. I mean, it's laughable that a law enforcement person would say that. I can only imagine how that would have gone over had I tried saying that. Oh, I have a recording, but I deleted it, but I know exactly what he wanted. I mean, it just sounds beyond absurd, and the fact that I even tried to take it seriously because I was scared he was going to try to take my house. I thought if I challenged him or contested him, I'd never see my baby pictures again, and things that had sentimental value. It just turned into an absolute nightmare. I finally got some of the photos. 5 years later, they started sending them to me. Never saw a single financial statement, did not see any bank records. I did go and look to see what was filed in the county clerk's office. That's how I know what that document that I signed was. It was a lawyer recently told me to look at that, and I just thought, wow. How could that lawyer do that? Literally 5 minutes after their client said, I have a recording, it got erased, but I know exactly what they wanted. It's illegal. If it's not in writing, it's meaningless. Obviously recording people without their knowledge or consent is also illegal and does not stand up. But they got away with it. And I don't even know what to say, because the fact that my dad knew that his affairs were being mishandled before he died and when he was still absolutely lucid and conscious is just beyond unethical, in my opinion, no matter what people's relationships were with my dad or what we all thought of him as a person, because he was difficult, but he didn't deserve that. He did not deserve that.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's additionally, you and I were talking a little bit before we sat down to record this, and I think a really interesting point that you made that, the audience listening right now might be listening to your story and say, well, well, why didn't you see the warning signs and do something about it? But I think, and a point you made that's really important to emphasize here is not wanting to believe that it's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're in that moment, you can't imagine that something like this could actually happen.
I didn't see it coming and I didn't expect it. And what
Yeah.
I did say, there were times when I was questioning just the aggressiveness, the
Hmm.
nastiness. And I even at one point, before we went to go see the lawyer, after I had shown, because the fourth sibling never really was present. He literally flew in for 24 hours and then he was gone. I think we had a couple of meals with him, and my brother had all these secret meetings with the fourth sibling, and we had a very short little family memorial for my dad, but
Hmm.
that was it. My interaction with the fourth brother was next to none, and I'm pretty sure that the two of them had all kinds of arrangements, and that was apparently permissible. But the the other stepbrother kept saying people grieve differently, and he's just grieving, and his grief is coming out in anger, and it's just anger because he's upset about our dad. And I said that's a really bizarre reaction, but and I tried to give him a pass. I tried to rationalize it. I tried to make sense of it. I also felt like my hands were tied because it had
Hmm.
been a number of years that we had all gotten the letters saying that this sibling had been designated as the executor. But what I will also add that I found highly offensive and disturbing, before my dad passed away, they were planting seeds that maybe my dad wasn't all there mentally. And I never saw any evidence of that. I never saw any evidence of that. And I found it so offensive because I called him every day after he had been hospitalized. And there were times when when one of the siblings was there, and they would say, "Well, he's not always understanding. He doesn't always know who's there." And my dad was a lot of things, and he was far from warm and cuddly and a perfect person. But he was lucid, and he was not mentally unstable, and he didn't have any kind of mental disabilities. And I had someone say again in hindsight, those are just classic signs of elder abuse, and people sowing seeds so that they can step in and take control of someone's affairs without it being questioned. And I don't remember the name of the film. I saw this film a couple of years ago. There was a film, I think it was a filmmaker from New Zealand who had, the storyline was this, it was based on, apparently on a true story, this woman who targeted seniors that didn't seem to have immediate family nearby, and then she'd go to their house and say, "I'm your conservator. I'm going to take care of your affairs and help you because you're not capable of doing that anymore." And it was so over the top. It was kind of a dark comedy. I found it really disturbing. But this apparently is a lot more common than
Oh yeah.
we'd all like to think or believe.
Yeah.
And I,
Being in the industry of estate planning, which goes hand in hand with elder care, it's honestly obscene how frequent elder abuse occurs, especially when there's a motive of exactly what you said. That film was about stealing money or taking over someone's estate without them knowing because they're not capable. It's really sad, and it's a problem
well,
that has been around and is still ongoing.
yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot in hindsight, and it's not going to do me any good because, again, they got away with it. I wanted to keep my dad's house. I wanted to buy the house, and obviously, I had
Hmm.
just bought a house, so buying it was going to be a challenge. And I had begged over and over. I sent these emails. Can we please have a group discussion how I could potentially buy the house from the estate from all of you? I don't want to lose the house. Wasn't up for discussion. You either buy it or you don't buy it. You have 2 weeks and get your own financing. We're not doing anything. And that was it. And it was sold at a fire sale, and it was gone. I just felt like my hands were tied. And this person was not suited to be the executor. I repeatedly said, can you just handle this with love and kindness? It was done with everything but.
Mm-hmm.
It was cruel. It was like he had some sort of a vendetta. And to this day, I don't know what my dad's estate was. I have no idea how much my dad had. I ended up getting a check for about $20,000. I'm sure he had more. I don't know. There was zero transparency. And apparently that lawyer wasn't obligated or didn't feel, I mean, I don't know how the law works, but I guess you can withhold information if you can get somebody to sign a waiver that says, I don't need to know anything, just send me a check if there's any money left.
Yeah, the manipulation that seems to have gone on there with the lawyer is crazy to hear about. And I mean, one thing that stands out to me is, going through all of this when you're in like a regular state of mind is already one thing, but having to deal with your dad's passing and the emotions and the grief that comes with that, and then on top of that, having this situation begin to arise, I can't imagine what that must have been like. And
well, I kept saying,
it's just a crazy story.
It is. I feel like you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's so over the top, and yet it isn't, because the people that I've shared this with on a personal side inevitably will say, well, it's not the same, but something kind of like that happened to a friend or a family member. And it's just astonishing to me that this is happening every day in plain sight. And it's hidden, but it's there. And it's grand theft. It should be illegal. It's fraud. It should be illegal, and it is. And yet there aren't really any checks and balances to prevent it from happening. And I don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah, and no one thinks that it can happen to them, which was a point I made earlier at the start of this, but it really is something I want to emphasize, that people, regardless of their family situation, still think that this is not something that can happen to them. But then I feel like almost everyone I talk to knows someone who's gone through some level of situation like this. And it's you'd think it would be like an eye-opener, but sometimes it still just doesn't seem to hit home, which is, again, one of the main reasons I wanted to have you come on here and share this story, because it's important for people to know about it. It's important for people to hear what can happen if things aren't handled properly, and how blindsiding it can be.
Without a doubt. And I just don't want to see this happen to anybody else. And yet it does. It's inevitably happening. And elder fraud is real. Elder abuse takes many shapes and forms. Financial abuse is real. Obviously, this is so out of my league, but I read recently Priscilla Presley is pressing charges because apparently somebody that she trusted committed elder financial abuse. And whether you have millions of dollars or just hundreds of dollars, to deny someone the right of having their final affairs handled the way that you wished them to be handled it's just beyond reprehensible. It's just so wrong. It's so wrong. So whatever I can do to contribute in however small a way it might be to prevent this from happening to somebody else is what I've been working on these days. And that's why I'd like to get the story out, even though I'm embarrassed. I mean, it's embarrassing to admit that, you fell for that. He had a recording. I didn't fall for it. I knew it was questionable, but what was I going to say? He was threatening to take my house. He was being really aggressive. And I had even said, can we do this together? Can we do it together? He obviously wasn't comfortable with you doing it anymore. No. If you are involved, the other brother, the mystery brother that never really spent any time, he's going to sue the estate. There was always a reason. There was always an excuse. It was always dramatic. It had lawyers. Let's get lawyers involved. See you in court. I mean, why would the executor tell a beneficiary, see you in court? I mean, he was just not suited to be in that role. He should have never been put in that role. And I sort of had the double whammy. By the time I finally had the courage to hire a lawyer, that person ended up not really following through for me. So, that there are a lot of bad lawyer stories out there, and I'm not saying the person didn't mean well, but he certainly didn't do well by me by not filing the paperwork.
Mm-hmm. And now, given your experience that you've had with this story, I wanted to see if we could discuss for our audience some things that, looking back, people could do or relate to or think about if they find themselves getting into a situation like this to help, avoid as best as possible situations like this. So I wanted to ask if anything comes to mind as just good pieces of mind to have to try to avoid getting into these kind of scenarios.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I would definitely not have gone back to Florida where my dad lived alone. And that sounds preposterous. Again, at the time, what would I have to fear? It's just my family. But these are people I hadn't seen in a long, long time, and just because they're family, just because somebody's in law enforcement, just because somebody has whatever kind of position they have, that you would think that they were ethical and trustworthy, doesn't make it so. I did, in my defense, try to get my then former partner to go with me. He didn't like to fly. He didn't want to go, and I didn't really have anybody else to go. In hindsight, even having a friend go with you so that you're not alone, whether that's a significant other or just, a non-family member, I really wish I had not been there by myself. If I had had a friend, I'm sure that person would have said, don't sign anything. Don't sign anything.
And I think that's a fantastic point to make, because not only is having someone there, it offers that area of support, but I think sometimes people may say, I don't want to bring anyone, I want to do this alone, because they think it'll help stop conflicts. But I think it's an important point to make that creating conflict in these situations is not always a bad thing. You obviously don't want it to become hostile, but having someone there who can objectively be there for you and say, wait a minute, this is not a good idea, even if that causes some conflict, I think that's a really important thing to have, because it causes conversation and it causes clarity to come forward. So I think that's perfect advice. Bring someone with you who can be objective and help you recognize those warning signs.
Absolutely. And even if it seems weird, they're not part of the family, what are they doing here? If someone had been there with me, I think it would have been different. Mm-hmm. I will also say I probably should have heeded my dad's advice. He was kind of, I don't want to say crying for help, but it was already apparent before he died when he said I should have hired a lawyer. I should not have wimped out. I was intimidated. I was really intimidated. I was concerned that I would have been challenged and it would have been questioned that I was tampering or interfering with my dad and his wishes. And the irony is that that's what the others were doing all along, and I was just too intimidated and worried about doing it the right way. I probably should have gotten a lawyer for my dad and said, if you want to have a lawyer, it's not too late. But again, it's easier said than done, because I think if, folks who are familiar with the founding story of Gentrio, lawyers' fees add up rapidly. And most people don't want their hard-earned money to be spent on legal fees. They'd rather see, their friends, their family, their children, their grandchildren, their loved ones get the money. But, of course, it's a dance. And would it have been any different if my dad had chosen a lawyer? Because he had gone to a couple of lawyers beforehand. He definitely had gone to lawyers and was told, this is very straightforward, you probably don't need somebody. And he was kind of an independent guy, and he thought he was pretty financially savvy. And at the end of the day, he just had all of his documents in that one briefcase, and there weren't copies of what he had in there for anyone else. So, I truly don't know what he had in the briefcase. I'll never know because I'll never see the contents. Those were withheld from me. And this is not what he would have wanted, but that's how it played out. So I think transparency is also really important. What I guess I would say to the audience and for folks wanting to prevent this from happening, even if it's an awkward conversation and nobody wants to talk about it, to make certain that everybody hears the same thing and have things in writing. My dad was so good about that. I don't think he expected to fall. I don't think he expected to have his health decline as rapidly as it did. I don't think he thought his briefcase would have been opened prematurely. But those things happened. He probably, in hindsight, should have had another set of those documents at a lawyer's office, another set of all the contents in a safe deposit box somewhere. And if he had known about Gentrio, again, if the contents of that briefcase had all been in the online vault, these questions would not have come up because it would have all been there for everybody to see. That's why, a service like Gentrio, and Gentrio in particular, because I'm just really, I am a huge fan of the founders and the story and why they started this company. That's why this is such an important service. And you can't afford not to think about these things, because not doing so can lead to disastrous outcomes.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate fact in this industry that sometimes not wanting to spend the money can exaggerate the nightmare that you find yourself in. And having obviously working for Gentrio, I love their product. I'm always a supporter for Gentrio, but I want to be careful of how I say this because I don't want it to come across as if I'm just, basically giving a shout out of an advertisement for Gentrio. But I do truly believe in their product and their message and the importance that it can have on people because of this exact kind of scenario where if things were in the cloud and available digitally so people can all have it whenever they need to, and if it's in a secure location, and that taking away the cost that you'd have going to a lawyer so that hesitation isn't there. Like, speaking from the outside looking in on Gentrio, half the reason I work here is because I truly do believe in that message that they send, and I think our founders Renee and Julie have put so much care into building this company so it can be just that. It can be something that can help to prevent these situations. So, I don't want to sound like I'm giving an ad for Gentrio at the end of this here, but, these kind of conversations, having them and making sure that there's no situation where planning and then reviewing the plan and planning over again to make sure being over prepared, it's worth the uncomfortability the uncomfortness that can come with it. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I just really do believe in what this company does and how it can help people. And I'm glad to hear that, having gone through what you've gone through, you can see how it can be beneficial in helping people avoid these situations, because it doesn't seem like something anyone should have to go through.
Well, it's just so wrong, because I was told there was no will. My dad had a will. My dad had everything planned out. I know he did. And then to be told that there was no will, his finances were in a shambles, but I never saw any evidence that would prove that. It's just, I don't even know what to say. Why or how someone would do that to an elder or a person whose health is declining and they're close to passing away. It's just unconscionable, and it's just wrong. And there should be more accountability, and there is a business opportunity somewhere for somebody to create a new model, and I think Gentrio is part of that. But
and I think it's an unfortunate reality people sometimes have to face, where, especially when you bring money into the situation, there's people who you feel you can trust who end up being capable of some awful things. And there's no shame in being prepared, you know, overly prepared, even if it might, like I keep saying, it might have a kind of an uncomfortable feeling, because it's like, oh, I feel like I should be able to trust this person. Why am I, it feels like you're building a bit of a wall there by being prepared and having things written out instead of having that trust. But it's worth having, and it can save so much heartache in the end, I think, because you never know what the future holds and what people can do. So, any final advice for our audience before we wrap up?
Well, I think for me, it's really the transparency is key. The transparency is so important. And I understand that people don't necessarily want to have these conversations, and you might also change your mind, and there may be scenarios where you don't want to leave people the same amount, and then there's a reluctance to be transparent about that before one's passing. I can think of any number of scenarios, but transparency doesn't necessarily have to mean every single person in the family. But I think having enough accountability established that it diminishes the likelihood or the opportunity for somebody to be a bad actor, that cannot be overemphasized. And does that mean it has to be a lawyer? I don't know. I mean, there are good lawyers and bad lawyers. My experience with a lawyer wasn't particularly favorable, but having multiple people be part of the accountability system, I think, is part of addressing this. And whether that's simply sending multiple copies of what your wishes are or how you'd like things done to different people for safekeeping. And even if you've got something like Gentrio, it probably doesn't hurt to have a couple of other places for safekeeping, and just making certain that you're not giving too much power or control to one person, because it can have disastrous outcomes that are not anywhere near what you would have envisioned or would have wished for your family and loved ones.
Well, personally for me, I just want to say I'm sorry you had to go through this whole situation. I don't think anyone should ever have to go through this, and I can't imagine, even now dealing with it, much less back when it was, at its most impactful. I do urge our audience listening today to really pay attention to what Maria has said today and take it to heart and really apply, her story to your own life, and, make sure you can be prepared so that you don't have to go through something like this. And Maria, I just want to say thank you so much for being on here and having the courage to share your story. I know it cannot be easy. I really appreciate you coming here and doing it so we can share some of the unfortunate, situations that have occurred to other people, and have some awareness that things like this can happen, but they can also be avoided with the proper planning in place. So I just want to, from me and everyone at Gentrio, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on. It really does mean a lot.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to share the story. If it helps a few people, that's what it's all about.
Well, that's our goal. Let's help the country one family at a time, and let's make sure people can be as protected as possible.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening in. As always, I'm your host, Jacob Murphy. Thank you very much, Maria, for being here, and we will see you guys on the next episode.